So I hit a milestone that I never expected to hit. As of today, I have read for 1 hour per day for 1,000 days in a row, which feels weird if I'm being honest, because when this whole thing started, I would have never expected to be here. But I'm excited about it, and just thought I would tell you about it. So um, I've learned a lot on this journey, but I guess first I want to talk about how it started. So I'm a busy guy. I've got several sort of companies that I work within, and I have 5 kids and a wife and a degree of a life. And a friend of mine came along and was like, "Hey, Adam, I want to start reading more, and I want you to start reading more with me as a kind of a challenge. Let's do a challenge together." And I said, "Okay, I can do that. I can read for 15 minutes a day. That'll be a stretch, but I think I can do it." And he was like, "No, that's not going to work. It has to be longer than 15 minutes." And so he said, "Let's do an hour. Let's do an hour a day." And at first I was like, "There's no way I can do an hour of reading every day. But I'll try. Let's see what could happen." And that's what we did. And I started, and at first it was incredibly difficult. And over time it got easy. So like at first, I'd sit down to read and I would be distracted. I wouldn't know what to read. I would struggle with focus and would just sort of muscle through an hour of reading. And then over time that got easier, and I stopped watching the clock as much. And over time that got easier. And now I can pretty easily just sit down and read for 1 hour flat without ever bothering to look at the clock, and just sort of enjoy my time. And because I do it in the mornings, my coffee, and it's just become this really beautiful habit and part of my day that isn't a struggle, even when I'm doing a million other things. And so it's a habit that I built over time that was difficult to do. So if you're thinking about a reading habit, it's not easy at first, but over time it gets easier and it gets better. And I would say it gets more beautiful. And even now, 1,000 days in to reading for an hour a day and hundreds of books in, I see the habit as more beautiful than ever. And I'm even more excited about the next 1,000 days. What changed for me, along the way, it went from, being a habit I forced myself into being a reader and being a learner, and sort of stepping into this new persona of who I could become and the wisdom that I wanted to gain. And over time also, I stopped looking at it as competing for time for my day, and I sort of fitting the rest of my day around this thing that I was committed to. And it became just really a lot easier to schedule after I did that. And so it's changed my mornings in kind of some major ways. Most mornings I read the full hour. I just sit down and I read, and I get the kid on the bus, and then I finish reading. And it's really helped me to slow down my morning. I'm not getting up and jumping into email and jumping into meetings and jumping into calendars and jumping into all this other stuff. I'm getting up and I'm sitting down and I've got a cup of coffee, and I'm slowly getting into my day. And it sort of allows me to sort of wade into the cold water that is today and sort of acclimate to it, and then sort of join in my day. So it slows down my morning. It slows down the totality of my day, and really allows me time for thought, time for reflection, and time to really just sort of slowly get into the day. And it sets the pace for everything else that the day holds, which I really enjoy. I'm calmer, I'm more focused, and I think in a lot of ways I'm much more intentional as a person, as a husband, as a dad, because of it. And that's probably because of some of the things that I do read as well. My taste over 1,000 days in a row of reading an hour a day has changed. So I used to do a ton of business books. And then at some point along the way, I got into Stoic philosophy and read a ton of Stoic philosophy books. And then at some point along the way, I got into Brandon Sanderson, which is fantasy fiction books. I didn't really read much fantasy at all, but Brandon Sanderson just really captivated my attention. And I read, tens of thousands of pages of his over the course of the last few years, and read his entire repertoire, which has been kind of amazing. I've also, and this is something that I'm actually learning recently, and had kind of paradigm shifting conversation really just 2 days ago about this, but I'm learning to read fiction novels for the sake of a beautifully written story, not for the sake of the action that happens within the context of the novel. And that's been really kind of an interesting change in perspective for me, and opens the door to a lot of literary works that I otherwise would not have enjoyed. And so, there's books that sort of rush you through the action, and that's kind of been my MO typically is action, sci-fi, thriller books, or a ton of business books, or some psychology books, or some philosophical books. But there's benefit to slower, nuanced novels that are beautiful. And so I love that. I also love that as I read fiction, it builds empathy, and it gives me insight into the perspective of another human. One of the books, A Man Called Uwe, that was just unbelievable. I mean, just so beautifully written, made me smile, made me laugh, made me cry. And but the empathy that I could have in sort of understanding his perspective on the world broadened my perspective on the world. And I really love that. Reading those types of books allows me to see the world through the eyes of someone that's not me, of someone that doesn't look like me or think like me. And it really gives me better perspective. I think it makes me a better human. So thinking about, advice that I would give myself, if I had to go back to, day one of this project, like what's the advice that I would want myself to know? I think I would say an hour a day feels daunting, but it's oddly doable. We live these lives where we believe to our core that we are fundamentally as busy as we can possibly be, and yet most of us are not. Most of us have free time that we're not even aware of. Most of us have more screen time than we know what to do with, or than is really probably healthy for us. Most of us do more fun stuff than we probably realize. Play too much Candy Crush, or we watch too much TikTok, or too much Netflix, or whatever else. And so within that context, reading for an hour a day actually became much more doable for me, recognizing that in my own life. Life doesn't have to be calm to read for an hour a day. I read for 1,000 days in a row, an hour a day. So I read when I was sick with the flu for an hour a day. I might not have comprehended as much, but I did read. I've read on every family vacation. I've read on every holiday. I've read on every road trip. There was one point in time in this where I was on a road trip with one of my closest friends going from California to Georgia, and I read every day on that trip as well. And so there's more time than you think if you want to make it a priority. I would also tell myself to abandon books. Abandon bad books. Life is too short for bad books, for poorly written books, for books that repeat themselves too much, for books that don't make a point or have a perspective, for books that are just kitschy and aren't really interesting. And so I would say abandon books. And by the time I have a thought to myself, should I abandon this book? The answer is always yes. I should absolutely let it go. And that's kind of my mantra now. I've learned the value of attention. Attention is arguably one of the most valuable things that you can give to something or someone. And giving an hour of my attention towards learning and growing every day as a human is one of the best things I can ever do for myself. But then not only that, but giving my attention fully to another person is one of the best things that I can do. And one of the best books that I've read this year is How to Know a Person. I think it's by David Brooks. And one thing that he talked about in that book that really stuck with me was he looks at attention as on or off. So when he's giving a person his attention, he's not giving the person his attention and looking at his phone. He's not giving the person his attention and reading the book. He's not giving the person his attention and watching the show. You're either giving them your attention or you're not. And that to me has been profound. And that's how I want to show up for my family. That's how I want to show up for my friends. And so I'm trying to do more of that as well. And I would also say, don't just read what's popular. I think in the last 1,000 days, what I've realized is I tend to read what's popular, and what's popular is not always great. And so I find myself wanting to read works that engage in the great conversation, which are kind of the philosophical works like Homer and things like that. I want to dig into those books in the next 1,000 days. But I want to read Jane Austen. I've never read a Jane Austen book in all of my reading. Like, how is that even possible? And so I want to dig into Jane Austen. I want to broaden my perspective and maybe even read poetry and different things like that. Like I want to read more than what's popular, because what's popular is not what's lasting. What's popular is not what's meaningful. It's just popular. And that doesn't make it good, and that doesn't make it wise, and it doesn't make it well written. I guess wrapping up, just some thoughts. For me, the 1,000 days of reading and reading for 1 hour, it wasn't about finishing books. It wasn't about a number of pages. It was about a dedicated practice towards self-improvement that would change who I am fundamentally, that would help me to grow as a human, help me to grow as a husband, as a father, as a person. And it helps me to become the person that I want to be. And that's really why I do it. I do count the books, but I'm not sharing them here because I don't care. What I share is that it's a practice that is meaningful to me and has really meant a lot. So if you are considering this, maybe you're considering a reading habit, what I would say to you is read. You don't have to do it for an hour. You don't have to do it for 1,000 days, but start small. Read a couple of pages here, read a couple of pages there. Commit to a book, commit to a practice, commit to a time frame. Start small. Let it compound over time. And you just might look around one day and recognize that you have completed 1,000 days of a practice that is profoundly meaningful to you, and that has profoundly changed you and improved the quality of your life. And I hope that's true for you, because that's what's been true for me.